The Somme, July 1, 1916, 7:30 a.m. Major James Jack stands in the British trenches watching the second hand on his watch tick toward 0 hour. Beside him 11 divisions, over 100,000 men, wait in the darkness of the forward trenches and assembly areas. They've been told the week-long bombardment has destroyed the German defenses. They've been told the wire is cut. They've been told they'll walk across no man's land and occupy empty trenches. 7:29:45. The bombardment lifts. For the first time in 7 days, the battlefield falls relatively quiet. 7:30:00. Whistles blow up and down the line. Men climb ladders, scramble over parapets, form up in the open. Then, Jack hears it. We knew at 7:30 that the assault had started. Hell later right through. Hearing the murderous rattle of German machine guns served without a break, notwithstanding our intense bombardment which had been expected to silence them. The sound is like nothing else, not the crack of rifles, not the thunder of artillery, something mechanical, relentless, a chattering death that sweeps across no man's land in invisible scythes. Men fall in waves. Lieutenant Dickinson of the 10th Lincolnshire Regiment is in the first wave. The enfilade machine gun fire. The air was full of bullets and the men began to fall all around us. It was tragic. Bullets punch through equipment, through bodies. Dickinson feels something between his fingers. A round has clipped skin from each finger. When he reaches for his haversack later, he finds bullets have gone through his Mashonichi ration and his tin of bully beef. Across the front, the scene repeats. The 2nd West Yorkshire Regiment advances toward the British front line. The Newfoundland Regiment goes over the top. 90% become casualties before reaching the British start line. In some sectors, the Germans wait. They let the British close to 30 or 50 meters. Then the machine guns open up. The element of surprise throws the attackers into immediate disorder. By the time the sun sets on July 1, 1916, the accounting is complete. 57,470 British casualties. 19,240 dead, the single bloodiest day in British military history. And the weapon that created this slaughter, European generals had celebrated it for 30 years. They'd used it to crush colonial uprisings. They'd demonstrated it to royalty. They'd praised its efficiency against Africans and Asians who could not stand against the Maxims. Now it was cutting down their own soldiers, like ripe corn before the scythe. The first burst of truly automatic fire in human history occurred in a basement workshop at 57D Hatton Garden in London's East Central District. The date sometime in summer 1883. The exact moment is lost to history. Hiram Maxim never recorded it precisely in his memoirs. He was too excited, too focused on what came next. What we know is this. He placed 6 cartridges into an apparatus head built. He pulled the trigger once. The weapon fired all 6 rounds, automatically cycling its own action, ejecting spent cases, feeding new rounds, firing again and again, until the ammunition was exhausted. I was delighted, Maxim later wrote. I saw certain success ahead, so I worked day and night on my drawings until they were finished and went into the shop and worked myself until I had made the gun. In that instant, in that basement in Hatton Garden, warfare changed forever. Hiram Stevens Maxim was 43 years old that summer. Born in 1840 in the backwoods of Maine, where religious zealots, bears, and Native Americans numbered among his childhood neighbors. A self-taught genius, actually described by one biographer as semi-literate, who'd invented everything from mousetraps to electrical apparatus to a steam-powered flying machine. He was a physically imposing figure, something of a braggart, an inveterate practical joker. His memoir contains as many fistfights as inventions. Even in middle age, he was capable of picking up an insubordinate employee and hurling him bodily through a door. Head arrived in England in August 1881, already holding over 80 U.S. patents. The American electrical industry, tired of his constant innovations disrupting their business, had essentially paid him $20,000 per year to go to Europe for 10 years and stop inventing electrical devices. His first stop was Paris. There, according to Maxim, he met an American Jew whom I had known in the States, who told him, "Hang your chemistry and electricity. If you wish to make a pile of money, invent something that will enable these Europeans to cut each other's throats with greater facility." The story is typical of Maxim, colorful, memorable, possibly exaggerated. But whether the conversation happened or not, Maxim took the advice. He returned to London and set up a workshop in Hatton Garden. For 2 years he devoted himself to the problem. The challenge wasn't creating a rapid-fire weapon. Hand-cranked machine guns already existed. The Gatling, the Gardner, the Nordenfelt. But these were notoriously unreliable. They jammed constantly. They required exposed standing men to crank them. They moved in sympathy with the vigorous actuation of their mechanisms, making them inherently inaccurate. Maxim's breakthrough was harnessing the energy released by firing a cartridge to cycle the weapon's action automatically. The recoil that had always been waste energy in firearms. He turned it into the power source. No cranks, no levers, no manual operation. Pull the trigger and the gun fires. Keep the trigger pulled and it continues firing until the ammunition runs out. The date can be deduced from patent number 3493, which Maxim registered on July 16, 1883, for an invention of improvements in machine or battery guns and in cartridges for the same and other firearms. The broad terms of the patent were no accident. As Maxim later explained, no one had ever made an automatic gun before the coast was clear. Consequently, I was able to take out any number of master patents to show every conceivable way of working an automatic gun, and to get very broad claims. The fertility of Maxim's mind is evident in this: his patents covered every way that has ever been employed to operate automatic weapons by the energy generated by firing a cartridge. But the first gun, the Forerunner, wasn't satisfactory. Over the ensuing months, Maxim created a new design, the prototype. First firing January 24, 1884. The spent cases of the first 2 cartridges fired are preserved in the Imperial War Museum. By 1887, Maxim had arrived at what he called his perfected gun. Its system of operation would remain standard in all Maxim guns and derivatives for decades to come. October 10, 1884. A public announcement of the new weapon was made via the press. The impact on London society was immediate. Powerful and influential men flocked to Hatton Garden to inspect this marvel. Among them, Albert Vickers, director of the steel company that bore his name. Randolph Simon, businessman. Together with Maxim, they formed the Maxim Gun Company, incorporated November 5, 1884. The public announcement of the new weapon was made via the press. The impact on London society was immediate. Powerful and influential men flocked to Hatton Garden to inspect this marvel. Among them, Albert Vickers, director of the steel company that bore his name. Randolph Simon, businessman. Together with Maxim, they formed. The Prince of Wales came, the Duke of Cambridge, the Duke of Edinburgh, Sir Garnet Wolseley, one of the foremost military men of the day. Wolseley's reaction captured the moment perfectly. "It is really wonderful, you Yankees beat all creation. There seems to be no limit what you are able to do." But not everyone was impressed. Maxim had wisely taken on a military advisor referred to throughout his autobiography only as Captain X. Probably for the best that his name wasn't preserved, because his advice was spectacularly bad. When Maxim designed a non-recoiling field gun, Captain X declared himself opposed. His objection: guns were not as a rule made for actual warfare, but for show, and the gun I had designed was extremely ugly as compared with the graceful form of existing guns. Warfare as aesthetics. Function subordinated to form. the mindset that would kill hundreds of thousands. Maxim's sales campaign in other countries initially struggled. The Turks were possibly the worst. At the War Ministry in Constantinople, an English-speaking official told him, "Hang your guns, we don't want your guns. Invent a new vice for us, and we will receive you with open arms. That is what we want." Even Maxim's inventive genius wasn't up to that particular task. But persistence paid off. In 1888, the Austro-Hungarian Empire placed the first major order, 131 Maxim guns. In Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II personally witnessed a demonstration and became enthusiastic. He equipped each of his Guard Dragoon regiments with a Maxim at his own expense. Russia entered the market, Navy and 1897 Army from 1899. Eventually they'd field around 5,000 guns by 1914, though spread across an army of over 3 million men. Britain purchased Maxims starting in 1888, eventually buying 288 guns by 1904. Production under license at the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield commenced in 1893. By 1900, the distinctive silhouette of the Maxim gun had established itself as an icon. Maxim later recorded inspecting postcards in a Swiss village shop and finding that on nearly every one of them was a picture of someone firing the Maxim gun. There was a wooden Maxim gun in the little village, and it was considered the thing for visitors to be photographed seated on the gun with the mountains in the distance. In London, impresario Frank Phillis staged Savage South Africa, a species of African Wild West show. One scene, which became the subject of an early film, featured charging Matabele tribesmen being dispersed by Maxim fire. In 1901, the Vaux Brewery of Sunderland launched a new product, Maxim Ale, named to celebrate the safe homecoming of Ernest Vaux, who'd commanded the machine gun section of the Northumberland Hussars in the Boer War. It has claims to being the first bottled brown ale ever sold in Britain. The Maxim had entered popular culture, a symbol of modernity, progress, British technological superiority. The killing would come later. The first actual British use of the Maxim in combat appears to have taken place during a punitive expedition into the Gambia in 1888. The occasion was marked by something notable, the personal operation of the Maxim by a general officer, Sir Francis de Winton, who successfully took the fortified town of Robari under fire. A general personally firing the machine gun. The weapon was still novel enough, prestigious enough that senior officers wanted to pull the trigger themselves. But it was 1893 that demonstrated what the Maxim could really do. The Matabele were formidable warriors with a highly organized military system. They attacked in close order formations with assegais, short stabbing spears, hoping to come to close quarters where their superior numbers and courage would tell. The British force was outnumbered, members of the British South African Police and volunteers, but they had 4.450-inch caliber Maxim guns. The battles at Shangani on October 24th, Mbimbezi on November 1st, and Mpindine on November 2nd followed the same pattern. The Matabele advanced with discipline and courage. The Maxims opened fire. Men fell in heaps. The Matabele reformed and charged again. The guns cut them down again. Lieutenant Colonel Willoughby fully acknowledged what had happened. I think it is doubtful whether the rifle fire brought to bear would have succeeded in repelling the attack. The Matabele themselves have since stated that they did not fear our rifles so much, but that they could not stand against the Maxims. A contemporary account in the Daily News captured the tragedy. Most of the Matabele had probably never seen a machine gun in their lives. Their trust was in their spears, for they had never known an enemy able to withstand them. Even when they found their mistake, they had the heroism to regard it as only a momentary error in their calculations. They retired in perfect order and reformed for a second rush. Once more the Maxims swept them down in the dense masses of their concentration. It seems incredible that they should have mustered for still another attack, yet this actually happened. They came as men foredoomed to failure, and those who were left of them went back to a mere rabble rout. The Matabele themselves gave testimony, the white man come again with his guns that spat bullets as the heavens sometimes spit hail, and who were the naked Matabele to stand up against these guns? Historian G. Hutchison recorded a macabre footnote. The Maxims were mounted on light artillery carriages with the gunner sitting on a small saddle at the end of the trailpiece. After the Matabele War, there is something more than a legend which records that the Central African native fled at the mere rumor of the approach of a man who, taking up the common native posture for the relief of nature, could in place of fluid eject a death-dealing stream of metal. The Matabele nation was crushed, subsumed into the new colony of Rhodesia, but the most striking demonstration was yet to come. 1896, 1899. The Sudan. Anglo-Egyptian forces under Major General Horatio Kitchener attempted to destroy the Mahia, the aggressive Islamic state established by Muhammad al-Mahdi, conqueror of Khartoum. 20 Maxim guns advanced up the Nile with Kitchener, wrapped in silk to protect their mechanisms from dust and sand. The climactic battle came at Omdurman in 1898. The Mahdist forces attacked with courage and discipline, the tactics that had conquered Khartoum, that had destroyed British forces before, but they'd never faced Maxims. A German military observer noted the range and effectiveness of a 6-gun battery of 303-inch Freien Inchthrals. A German military observer noted the range and effectiveness of a 6-gun battery of 303-inch caliber weapons when compared with the 450-inch black powder rifles of the Egyptian infantry fighting alongside them. The Maxims cut the attackers down at ranges the Mahdists couldn't comprehend. Men fell in windows. Charges broke before reaching the British lines. The Daily Telegraph reporting on Omdurman was moved to assert, "In most of our wars it has been the skill and the bravery of our officers and men that have won the day. But in this case, the battle was won by a quiet scientific gentleman living down in Kent." That same year, 1898, Hilaire Belloc published his comic poem, The Modern Traveler, containing the much-quoted lines, "Thank God that we have got the Maxim gun, and they have not." The intent was satirical. The whole poem mocked contemporary attitudes toward colonial affairs. But the lines would be remembered without the irony. Anti-imperialist Henry Labouchere parodied Rudyard Kipling pile on the brown man's burden. And if you rouse his hate, meet his old-fashioned reasons with Maxims. Up to date, by 1900, the pattern was established. European forces with Maxims could slaughter African and Asian forces with virtual impunity. Technology had created an unbridgeable gap. A single British officer, Seymour Vandeleur, exemplifies the ubiquity of the weapon. His career from 1895–1899 reads like a Maxim gun catalog. January 1895, expedition across Lake Albert, 1 Maxim with 18 men. February 1895, punitive force into Kabrega, Uganda. Several Maxim detachments. April 1895, stronger force with 2 Hotchkiss guns. And 3 Maxims. 1896, expedition against the Nandi with the inevitable Maxim. 1897, expedition against Emir of Nupa. 7 companies each with a Maxim. 1897, expedition against Emir of Nupa. 7 companies each with a Maxim. 1897, exession against Belagun tribe. 340 men and 4 Maxims. 1898. Battle of Omdurman. 1899. Mopping up operations in Kordofan with 6 Maxims. 1900. Boer War with 1st Mounted Infantry Brigade, 6 380 men and 20 Maxims. 1 man. 5 years. Maxims in every campaign. The machine gun worked. European generals saw it work. They celebrated its effectiveness against Africans and Asians. February 8, 1904. Manchuria. Japanese torpedo boats attack the Russian Pacific Fleet at Port Arthur without warning. The Russo-Japanese War has begun. For the first time, two modern industrialized nations with magazine-fed rifles, modern artillery, and machine guns face each other in large-scale warfare. Both sides deploy machine guns extensively. The Russians have Maxims built under license in Germany, organized in 8-gun batteries per division. The Japanese use Hotchkiss guns initially, with cavalry later 3 or more per infantry regiment. The Russians quickly discover their high-wheeled carriages make their Maxims extremely vulnerable. Soldiers improvise lower carriages and sleds. The lesson is learned. The Russian-built M1905 Maxim comes with a much handier low-wheeled mount, but the effectiveness is undeniable. At Port Arthur, 400 Japanese infantrymen attempt to take cover in a trench during an assault. 2 concealed Russian Maxims on a nearby hill take them in enfilade. A witness recorded what happened. Within a few seconds it was turned into a veritable pandemonium, a seething mass of humanity where men were wildly fighting to get away, trampling on the wounded, climbing over piles of corpses which blocked the entrance, and trying to escape down the coverless hillside. But the Maxims did their work as only Maxims can, and within a few moments practically the entire force was wiped out. Foreign observers flood both armies. The British send Lieutenant General Sir Ian Hamilton, who will later command at Gallipoli. Germans, French, Americans, all watching, all taking notes. The lessons are impossible to miss. Artillery and machine guns dominate the battlefield. Entrenchments are necessary. Frontal assaults against prepared positions result in massive casualties. The age of cavalry charges and bayonet attacks is over. A French general declared, "After this war, and especially with soldiers more nervous and less phlegmatic than the Russians, like it or not, one must encumber oneself with this new device if one is likely to face an adversary who possesses it." A British infantry officer recalled, "The Russo-Japanese War had drawn attention to the great latent possibilities of the automatic, and many soldiers were beginning to study and interest themselves in the matter." The responses varied dramatically. Germany. Immediate action. In 1908, Matthias Erzberger, speaking in the Reichstag, alluded to the change a year ago. People in military circles were not so conscious of the value of machine guns as they are today. Then there were many people, even in the German army, who still regarded the machine gun as a weapon for use against Hereros and Hottentots. By 1912, a new army bill recognized. Yet even in 1926, after the Great War, after the Somme, after everything, Haig asserted, "I believe that the value of the horse and the opportunity for the horse in the future are likely to be as great as ever. Aeroplanes and tanks are only accessories to the man and the horse." The machine gun had proven itself against the Matabele, against the Mahdists, against the Russians, against the Japanese. European generals had seen it work. Now they were about to learn what it felt like to be on the receiving end. June 24, 30, 1916. The Somme. For 7 days British artillery pounds German positions. Porn 537 guns fire approximately 1.5 million shells. The bombardment can be heard in London 140 miles away. The plan is simple. The artillery will destroy the German defenses, cut the wire, bury the machine guns, kill the defenders. Then the infantry will walk not run, across no man's land and occupy the empty German trenches. In the German positions, the reality is different. The British shells have indeed caused damage, but the Germans have dug deep. Some dugouts extend 40 feet into the chalk of the Somme plateau. Reinforced with concrete and steel, the machine gun emplacements are fortified strongpoints. Many guns survive. More importantly, the German gunners survive, sheltering in the deep dugouts waiting for the bombardment to lift. July 1, 1916. 7:28 a.m. The bombardment reaches its crescendo. Then at 7:30 it lifts. The sudden relative silence is profound. In the German dugouts, whistles blow. Machine gun crews race up the steps carrying their weapons. The MG-08 Maxims, each weighing about 40 pounds for the gun alone, plus the sledge mount, plus ammunition, plus water for cooling. They emerge into a cratered moonscape. Rush to their positions. Set up the guns. Load the ammunition belts. Across no man's land, British soldiers are climbing out of their trenches. The topography of the Somme battlefield favors the Germans. They hold the high ground. Numerous folds, valleys, and re-entrants provide positions for enfilade fire, firing from the flank, sweeping along the length of the British advance, rather than meeting it head-on. The machine guns are distributed throughout the German front line, or grouped in fortified redoubts and villages dominating the high ground. The German gunners have trained for this. They know their fields of fire. They've pre-registered their guns. They know the ranges. 7:30 a.m. The whistles blow along the British lines. Major James Jack, 2nd Cameronians, hears it immediately. We knew at 7:30 that the assault had started through hearing the murderous rattle of German machine guns served without a break, notwithstanding our intense bombardment which had been expected to silence them. The sound is distinct, not the individual cracks of rifles, a mechanical chattering, rhythmic, relentless, about 400-500 rounds per minute per gun. Multiple guns create an overlapping wall of fire. Along the 27,000-yard front, the slaughter begins. In some sectors, the German machine gunners open fire immediately, at 1,800 to 2,000 meters, over a mile away. The British soldiers are tiny figures in the distance, but the machine guns are precisely set for range and direction. The beaten zone, the area where bullets fall, sweeps across the advancing infantry. Men fall. Other men step over them and continue forward. More men fall. Lieutenant Dickinson, 10th Lincolnshire Regiment, is in the assault. The enfilade machine gun fire. The air was full of bullets. I got one between my fingers, just clipped a bit out of each. When we came to want something to eat, when you got your haversack off your back, you found that the bullets had gone through your mashonakshi ration, or tin of bully beef. The air is full of bullets, an invisible storm of metal. Men walking through it have nowhere to hide. In other sectors, the German gunners employ a different tactic. They hold their fire. Let the British advance. Closer, closer, 30 meters, 50 meters. Then the guns open up. The element of surprise, psychological shock, the sudden transition from seeming success to instant catastrophe. German prisoners later testify, the fire of the German machine guns was such that a breakthrough proved unthinkable. The German machine gunners opened up only when the British were 30 or 50 meters from the trench under attack, and the element of surprise threw them into disorder. The 36th Ulster Division achieves a remarkable penetration around the Schwaben redoubt. They break into the German positions. But machine guns on the flanks continue firing. Further progress is curtailed. Reinforcements can't get forward. The guns on the flanks cut them down. The 2nd West Yorkshire Regiment attempts to advance toward the British front line, not even into no man's land yet. They must cross a crest behind the British trenches. Major Jack watches from his position. The enemy's machine guns, some 400 yards from my position, now swept the crest, like a hurricane, and with such accuracy that many of the poor fellows were shot at once. This battalion had 280 casualties in traversing the 600 yards to our front line. 400 yards. Nearly a mile. The machine guns reach out across that distance with lethal precision. The Newfoundland Regiment waits in reserve at St. John's Road, a support trench. When their turn comes, they must advance over open ground behind the British front line before even reaching no man's land. German machine guns on the high ground have this ground registered. The Newfoundlanders go over the top. The machine guns open fire. Within 30 minutes, the regiment suffers approximately 90% casualties. Most fall before reaching the British front line. Some wounded men crawl back. Some lie in shell holes for days before rescue. Dead men hang on the wire in front of the German positions. The bodies pile up in some areas. A German witness later describes British infantry cut down like ripe corn before the scythe. The spent machine gun cartridge cases pile up around the German gun positions. Thousands of brass cases. The barrels glow red with heat. Water in the cooling jackets boils, creating steam that vents through tubes. The gunners change barrels when they overheat. Keep firing. By 8 a.m., the first wave is shattered in most sectors. The second wave goes forward. The machine guns cut them down. The third wave. The same. German analysis of the day, based on interviews with wounded British prisoners, concluded that machine guns were beyond doubt the main strength of the German defense, against which the attackers stood no chance, as they called it. The destructive power of the machine gun is the cause of the enormous losses they sustained, and the first impetus of the attack was on many occasions broken just by the fire of the machine guns in the first German line. A single German machine gun properly positioned and served by a resolute crew could stop an entire battalion. 2 machine guns in enfilade could destroy a regiment. By midday, the casualty clearing stations are overwhelmed. By afternoon, the medical system is breaking down under the sheer numbers. By sunset, the accounting is clear: 57, 470 casualties. 19, 240 dead. The single bloodiest day in British military history. And it wasn't over. The Battle of the Somme would continue for another 141 days. Among the ruins of the German positions, British troops who finally reach the objectives find the machine gun crews. The testimony is consistent and remarkable. Lieutenant General Carton de Weert later writes the German machine gunners were outstanding, almost invariably very brave men, and the pick of the German army. One day on the Somme, we were held up for a considerable time by a German machine gun. Finally, we silenced it and were able to advance and found the whole crew dead, but all of them bandaged, having been wounded several times before being killed. Wounded several times, bandaged, still fighting. Another account. We found a young German lying dead beside a machine gun, and the villagers told us that all the Germans had retired, except this young boy who had remained firing his gun until he was killed. One boy, one gun, holding his position after everyone else fled, fighting until the end. The intensive German training has created something extraordinary. A machine gun corps d'élite. Men who see themselves as the elite of the army. Who take pride in their weapon. Who will die at their guns rather than surrender or retreat. And the British soldiers, even after suffering terribly, recognize it. A young officer of the Northumberland Fusiliers tells war correspondent Philip Gibbs, "They are wonderful men, and work their machines until they are bombed to death. In the trenches by Fricourt, they stayed on when all the other men had either been killed or wounded, and would neither surrender nor escape. It was the same at Loos, and it would not be sporting of us if we did not say so, though they have knocked out so many of our best." Sporting. Even in the midst of mechanized slaughter, the British public school mentality persists. The language of cricket and rugby. Fair play. Giving credit where it's due. Sir Henry Newbolt would have been proud. Back in England, where the casualties are still only newspaper numbers and not comprehended reality, Captain A.J. Dawson writes a book called Somme Battle Stories. One officer supposedly tells him, "This business of fighting continuously and cheerily in the presence of devastating casualties, has a good deal in common with swimming and bicycling and things of that sort, in which instinct plays a big part, and horse riding too." Horse riding, bicycling, as if this is a sport. The troops at the front know better. Letters make their way home. For Christ's sake, Write a book on the life of an infantryman, and by so doing, you will quickly prevent these shocking tragedies. A lieutenant writes before being killed, murder, through the incompetence, callousness, and personal vanity of those high in authority. After one spell in the trenches, an officer writes, "We have just come out of a place so terrible that a raving lunatic could never imagine the horror of the last 13 days. 250,000 British casualties on the Somme when it finally ends in November. For a maximum advance of 8 miles, by any conventional standard, an appalling failure." Yet the generals learn nothing. But the story of the machine gun in the Great War is more complex than the first day of the Somme suggests. The truth: artillery caused 58/60 of all casualties. A man struck in the chest by shrapnel or shell fragment was 3 times more likely to die than a man similarly wounded by small arms fire. Artillery created trench warfare. The machine gun defended the trenches artillery created. Yet the machine gun became the icon, the symbol, the cipher for the entire war. Why? Because the machine gun was comprehensible. Point and shoot. Cause and effect. Simple to understand even if you'd never been to the front. Artillery was complex. Trajectories. Time fuses. Indirect fire from miles away. Abstract. Impersonal in a different way. But the machine gun? Everyone could imagine it. The mechanical rattle. The man behind the gun. The bullets sweeping across no man's land. The reality was far more sophisticated than the popular image suggests. By 1916, British machine gun tactics had evolved dramatically from the crude direct-fire doctrine of 1914. Consider overhead fire. Machine guns could fire over the heads of friendly troops on completely flat terrain. The natural trajectory of bullets coupled with precise elevation settings controlled by clinometer made this possible. Calculations determined the minimum elevation safe for intervening troops. The tripod legs were buried in sandbags and earth to prevent any settling that might lower the trajectory. Wooden stakes or stops prevented traversing or elevating outside safe parameters. The result: supporting fire for attacking infantry that didn't require flanking positions. Consider barrage fire. Machine guns conducted elaborate planned barrages like miniature artillery. Pre-registered positions. Calculated trajectories. Coordinated fire patterns. The most famous example: Captain G.S. Hutchinson's barrage at High Wood, August 24, 1916. 10 guns in continuous rapid fire for 12 hours. They fired 750 rounds. 2 companies of infantry were detailed just to stockpile ammunition and water. When the water supply failed, Hutchinson requisitioned the company's water bottles and all the urine tins from the neighborhood. The target: the area behind the crest line on which High Wood stands. German infantry attempting to counterattack had to pass through this zone. According to a German prisoner, the effect was annihilating. Another example from the Grantham training syllabus at Ovelers, July 14, 1916. 3 sections of a machine gun company received warning from a reconnaissance aircraft that Germans were assembling for a counterattack from Pozières. Within 12 minutes, 3 barrages were fired at the German assembly area, in dead ground behind Pozières Cemetery, where the British artillery couldn't reach. The divisional commander considered that the machine guns had checked the attack by their own unaided barrage. This was the evolution the first day obscures. The machine gun wasn't just a defensive weapon firing directly at attacking infantry. It had become something far more versatile, a precision instrument capable of complex fire plans supporting offensive operations, conducting defensive barrages, neutralizing assembly areas, and suppressing counterattacks. By 1918, the organization had evolved as well. The Machine Gun Corps, created in 1915, had grown into a sophisticated arm with its own tactics, doctrine, and command structure. Each division had a machine gun battalion by 1918, 4 companies of 16 guns each. Commanded by a CMGC, Commander Machine Gun Corps, who planned divisional-scale gun schemes. The Canadian Corps went further. Commander Sir Arthur Currie created machine gun battalions with 3 large companies of 32 guns each, organized into batteries of 8 guns. The Germans, meanwhile, integrated machine guns organically into their infantry battalions. Each battalion had a 6-gun company. Different doctrine, same recognition of importance. The difference in approach reflected strategic imperatives. The British, committed to offensive operations, developed machine gun barrage fire to support attacks and defend captured ground. The Germans, generally defensive on the Western Front from late 1940. The 56th Division's machine gun scheme became a textbook example. Well-sighted guns following a complicated plan with interlocking fields of fire, supplemented by fire from neighboring divisions. Lewis guns covering dead ground near the front line. Each battery had both battle lines for direct fire and target areas for indirect SOS fire. Despite a vicious bombardment and persistent air attacks, the machine guns played a major role in stopping the German attack. The only significant lodgment came in an area protected by topography from Vickers fire. Around Gavrelle, very heavy casualties fell on attackers advancing shoulder to shoulder. Outdated tactics. One captured German officer claimed machine guns had accounted for 12 officers of one regiment and 24 in another. Conversely, when British defensive schemes were inadequate, the results were catastrophic. The German Michael offensive on March 21, 1918 broke through Fifth Army, partly due to inadequate machine gun planning and failure to implement new battalion organization. Colonel Hutchinson was adamant that machine gun emplacements and ammunition supplies were inadequate. Brigadier Edmund Ironside noted in his diary that General Gough had refused to keep at least half his machine guns out of front-line positions. Yet individual machine gun units performed heroically. General Ludendorff himself stated in a memorandum dated March 30, "During the course of our offensive, the principal resistance was offered by the machine gun nests distributed in depth. The men of the Machine Gun Corps earned their Suicide Club nickname. Bombarded by high-explosive shrapnel and gas, attacked from the air, stalked by grenade-armed stormtroopers, made special targets of Minenwerfer. At 3rd Ypres, Passchendaele, the conditions were arguably worse than anywhere else. The sheer logistics of bringing ammunition forward through the mud were brutal. Each case of 1,303-inch cartridges weighed over 38 kilograms. Near the front line, limbers and mules became useless. Everything moved by manpower. Special shelters had to be built to keep ammunition belts dry while being filled. The fragile Lewis gun suffered more than the robust Vickers in these conditions. One report from 58th Division listing reasons for a failed attack includes, "The only Lewis gun succeeded in getting into action, was useless in 3 minutes. All uncovered rifles were useless, all covered rifles ditto within 10 minutes." The Battle of Polygon Wood, September 25 to 27, 1917, exemplifies the grinding nature of machine gun warfare in the salient. Colonel Hutchinson commanded the machine guns of 33rd Division. His men brought up 700,000 rounds of ammunition under sudden and violent shell storms, or subject to the annoyance of being sniped by field guns, across a mile of shell-pocked land to the positions. The burden was most severe following as it did a march from bivouacs over the broken, pitted, mud-covered track of 8 miles. His men suffered heavily from enemy artillery while conducting barrages. On September 25, the Germans launched a preemptive attack precisely as 33rd Division was relieving 23rd. The Germans advanced with outstanding gallantry straight into the direct fire of the independent 207th Machine Gun Company. The enemy was so far committed to the assault that he could not retire, but must advance, Hutchinson recorded. Low-flying aeroplanes, however, soon detected the battery, and both by machine gun action and directing artillery fire upon the gunners, the enemy inflicted severe casualties among them. This was the reality of machine gun warfare by 1917 to 1918. Not just men firing at other men across no man's land, but a complex combined arms battle, where machine guns, artillery, and aircraft worked together or against each other. The machine gun had evolved from a novelty weapon to an integral element of the battlefield system, but in the popular imagination it remained frozen at 7:30 a.m. July 1st, 1916. Men walking into machine gun fire. Nothing more, nothing less. December 23, 1916. Field Marshal Douglas Haig writes his final dispatch from the Somme. It includes this observation: machine guns play a great part, almost a decisive part under some conditions, in modern war. Almost a decisive part, under some conditions. Had just concluded a battle where 470 men became casualties in a single day, largely due to machine gun fire, where 250,000 total casualties bought 8 miles of cratered ground. His dispatch acknowledges the weapon's importance. Then, in 1917, he approves Nivelle's offensive in Champagne. The same conditions apply. The same machine guns wait. The same interlocking fields of fire. Nivelle's plan is based on mystical thinking. The character of violence, of brutality, and of rapidity must be maintained, as if willpower and aggression can overcome steel and mathematics. The offensive fails, catastrophically. The French army mutinies. The Somme itself continued for 3 more months after the first day. Haig kept the offensive going, throwing men against continuously reinforced German positions. The Australian official history notes on the front line the method merely appeared to be that of applying a battering ram 10 or 15 times against the same part of the enemy's battlefront, with the intention of penetrating for a mile or possibly 2 in the midst of his organized defenses. Even if the need for maintaining pressure be granted, the student will have difficulty in reconciling his intelligence to the actual tactics. Mater to rearswide Salian soldiers reveal the reality. For Christ's sake, write a book on the life of an infantryman, and by so doing you will quickly prevent these shocking tragedies. A lieutenant before being killed. Murder. Through the incompetence, callousness, and personal vanity of those high in authority. After 13 days in the line, we have just come out of a place so terrible that a raving lunatic could never imagine the horror. 250,000 British casualties. Nowhere along the 12-mile front was more than 8 miles gained. An appalling failure by any conventional standard. And still the cavalry mystique persisted. In 1926, 10 years after the Somme, 8 years after the war ended, Haig writes, "I believe that the value of the horse, and the opportunity for the horse in the future, are likely to be as great as ever. Aeroplanes and tanks are only accessories to the man and the horse." This is the same man who commanded on the Somme, who saw the machine gun's almost decisive importance, who watched cavalry charges break against machine gun fire. The institutional inability to learn is staggering. But Haig wasn't alone. Some commanders never learned. Colonel Hutchinson writes, "The persistence by some corps and divisional commanders in disregarding the lessons from previous experience remained marked, and indeed in some instances was continued until the armistice." The Americans arrived in 1918 with the same problem. The U.S. Army's initial attacks used shamefully outmoded massed assault tactics. The cost in American lives was terrible, the price of failing to understand the Western Front before committing troops to battle. Even some German attacks in 1918 reverted to outdated mass formations, suffering accordingly. The technology had outpaced the military mind. Not universally. Many commanders adapted, innovated, developed effective tactics. But enough senior officers remained wedded to pre-1914 thinking that hundreds of thousands died unnecessarily. The question is why? New 40 and is 0 now, and the colonial experience. November 1916. In the midst of the Somme battle, Hiram Maxim dies. He is 76 years old. His views on the impact of his weapon on the Great War are unrecorded. He never saw the full horror of what his invention had become. But years earlier, Head made a wry comment: had it been anything else but a killing machine. Very little would have been said of it. The fame came from the death, the pinnacle of recognition, because it dealt death more efficiently than anything before. For a decade after the war, the memoirs and first-hand accounts appear. They mention machine guns, but don't elevate them to dominance. Artillery features just as prominently, often more so. But something shifts in the historiography. Those at remove from actual combat, politicians, theorists, historians, seize upon the machine gun as the symbol of the war, the explanation for the stalemate, the reason for the slaughter. Why? Because it's simple, comprehensible. The ostensibly straightforward point-and-shoot cause and effect of machine gun fire offers an easy way to explain the complexity of the Western Front. 1927, Winston Churchill publishes The World Crisis. The phrase he coins becomes iconic. If only the generals had not been content to fight machine gun bullets with the breasts of gallant men, and think that was waging war. It's Churchill at his best, a ringing phrase that captures emotion and assigns blame in a single sentence. It's also Churchill at his worst, substituting persuasive eloquence for hard fact. The reality was far more complex than this memorable oversimplification. But the phrase sticks. It's too good not to quote. 1933, Captain Basil Liddell Hart creates the legend. Little Hart served in the war but appears not to have suffered unduly from machine gun fire. Indeed, he confessed to fearing shells and aerial bombs far more than bullets. He was in reserve when his battalion attacked on the first day of the Somme, then was invalided home after being gassed at Mametz Wood. After the war, he establishes himself as the most renowned military thinker of his generation. Military correspondent for the Daily Telegraph, then The Times. Influential beyond merely military circles, he becomes an advocate for armored warfare, tanks as the answer to the machine gun problem. And to justify tanks, he exaggerates the importance of machine gun fire. If the machine gun is the dominant threat, then tanks are the essential solution. By 1933, he states with confidence in a lecture, "The one man who bestrode the world war like a colossus was Hiram Maxim." Generals and statesmen became helpless puppets in the grip of his machine gun. The machine gun was and still is the dominant fact in land warfare. Helpless puppets. Dominant fact. It's dramatic, memorable, and profoundly misleading. But Little Hart doesn't limit his influence to his own writing. His network of contacts is extensive. Among them, wartime Prime Minister David Lloyd George. Hart acts as military advisor for Lloyd George war memoirs. The machine gun is characterized as the most lethal weapon of the war. Lloyd George is eager to puff his own achievements in increasing machine gun production, while Minister of Munitions. Simultaneously, he defames his wartime enemies in the high command. The machine gun becomes a weapon in a political battle as much as a historical subject. The 1960s bring a renewed interest in the Great War. The 50th anniversary. A new generation of historians. But they rely on the secondary sources already available. The 50-year rule on official papers is still in place. Primary sources are limited. So the myth replicates, amplifies. Leon Wolf's, in Flanders Fields, is widely credited as the first of this new wave. It quotes J.F.C. Fuller on thousands of armored machine guns. Alan Clark, protege of Little Hart, envisions that most haunting of all the sounds of trench warfare, the drawn-out rattle of a long burst on the machine gun. A.J.P. Taylor is clear. One man with a machine gun protected by mounds of earth was more powerful than advancing masses. The machine gun completed the contrast between the speed with which men could arrive at the battlefield by rail and the slowness with which they moved when they were there. Indeed, they did not move at all. The myth is now complete. Self-reinforcing. The machine gun as the explanation for everything wrong with the war. Icon of feudal slaughter, symbol of generals' incompetence. Cipher for the horror of the Western Front. But what's the reality beneath the myth? All armies innovated tactically during the Great War. All of them. The British developed machine gun barrage fire for offensive operations. The French developed portable automatic weapons for assault. The Germans developed interlocking defensive fire in depth. The Italians developed weapons for mountain close combat. These innovations suited their strategic imperatives and tactical situations. As historian Paddy Griffith notes, the exclusive charmed circle which is conventionally drawn around the Great War's tactical innovators, whether Germans, Anzacs, or Tankies, turns out to be quite illusory, since tactical innovation was a game that almost everyone was playing, even including the woolly old cavalry generals themselves. The creation of the British Machine Gun Corps was a logical response to their need for offensive machine gunnery. The German maintenance of organic machine gun companies within infantry battalions suited their defensive tactics. Different solutions. Same recognition of importance. By 1918, scientific machine gunnery had evolved, an amalgam of tactics and techniques undreamt of by most pre-war soldiers and scarcely understood even today. Consider the sophistication overhead fire requiring precise mathematical calculations, barrage fire with pre-registered positions and coordinated patterns, indirect fire over hills and obstacles, SOS fire triggered by predetermined signals, defensive schemes with interlocking fields from multiple positions. This wasn't crude point and shoot. This was complex coordinated firepower integrated with artillery, infantry, and even air support. But Hutchinson's warning remains. The persistence by some corps and divisional commanders in disregarding the lessons from previous experience remained marked, and indeed in some instances was continued until the armistice. Some learned, some didn't. The U.S. Army's initial failure to comprehend the nature of Western Front combat cost American lives. German mass attacks in 1918 using outdated tactics suffered heavily. The tactical advances weren't applied comprehensively or universally. And there's another truth buried beneath the myth. The colonial legacy. European generals had watched machine guns slaughter Africans and Asians for 30 years. They'd celebrated the weapon's efficiency. They'd used it to build empires. Matabele warriors charging with assegais, cut down in heaps. Matist forces at Omdurman, like ripe corn before the scythe. Fulani cavalry at Sokoto. Many hundreds were killed. Thank God that we have got the Maxim gun. And they have not. The machine gun was the weapon of colonial superiority. Technology over courage. Civilization over savagery. White over brown and black. And perhaps that's why British generals struggled to comprehend what the machine gun could do to their own soldiers. It was a weapon that worked against colonial peoples, against inferior races, against warriors with spears. Surely it couldn't be equally effective against British soldiers, against Europeans, against civilized men. The psychology is insidious, unspoken, possibly unconscious. But it's there in the resistance to taking Manchurian lessons seriously. There in the cavalry general's faith in moral force and cold steel. There in Captain X advising Maxim that guns are for show, not warfare. There in sending men to walk across no man's land after a week-long bombardment that clearly hadn't destroyed the German defenses. The machine gun worked against Africans because they were primitive. It wouldn't work against Europeans because they weren't. Except it did. Here is what the numbers actually show. Artillery caused 58 to 60 of Great War casualties. Shells and fragments. High explosive and shrapnel. A man struck in the chest by shell fragments was 3 times more likely to die than a man struck by bullets. Artillery created trench warfare. the necessity of going underground to survive bombardment. The machine gun defended the trenches artillery created, not the other way around. So why does the machine gun loom so large in memory and myth? Partly psychological. The sound, that mechanical chattering death. The impersonality. Men killed by a machine, not another human, in hand-to-hand combat. The helplessness. You couldn't charge through machine gun fire the way you might charge through rifle fire. Partly scale. One gun equals one company of riflemen. 600 rounds per minute. The efficiency is stark. Partly the first day of the Somme. The single bloodiest day. The image that defines the war. And on that day machine guns were indeed the primary killer. But that day wasn't representative of the war as a whole. The real failure wasn't technological. It was tactical. Strategic. Psychological. The warnings from Manchuria were clear. Machine guns and artillery dominated the battlefield. Entrenchments were necessary. Frontal assaults against prepared positions resulted in massive casualties. All the major powers saw this. All received the same reports. Germany responded. France responded. Russia responded. Britain's cavalry-dominated War Office did not. Not because they didn't understand the machine gun. They'd seen it work for 30 years. But because they believed in moral force. In the speed of the horse, the magnetism of the charge, and the terror of cold steel. Haig, in 1904. It is not the weapon carried, but the moral factor of an apparently irresistible force. The 1907 Cavalry Training Manual. The rifle, effective as it is, cannot replace the effect produced by the speed of the horse. Faith over evidence. Tradition over innovation. Victorian values over modern warfare. The cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Not because the machine gun was too effective, but because generals sent men against it with tactics from Waterloo. The sun sets on the Somme. Across no man's land the killing has stopped, for now. Bodies lie in shell holes on wire in the mud. Some will lie there for days before recovery. Some will never be found. In the German positions, machine gun crews count their spent cases. Thousands of brass cartridges piled around each gun. Some barrels are ruined from overheating. They'll need replacement. Some guns are damaged from British artillery that finally found them. And some gunners are dead. The British troops who finally reached some German positions found them. Machine gun crews horde fought to the end. Some wounded multiple times, bandaged, still firing. One young German who stayed at his gun after everyone else fled, found dead beside his weapon. A British officer of the Northumberland Fusiliers tells correspondent Philip Gibbs, "They are wonderful men, and work their machines until they are bombed to death. It would not be sporting of us if we did not say so, though they have knocked out so many of our best. Sporting. Even now. Even after this." The language of cricket and fair play. As if this were a game. So was it the machine gun that turned battlefields into slaughterfields? Or was it generals who celebrated technology against savages, then sent their own men against it with tactics from a different century? Winston Churchill was right about one thing. They did fight machine gun bullets with the breasts of gallant men. But it wasn't because they didn't understand the machine gun. They'd seen it work at Omdurman. 6 machine guns and 20,000 Mahdists dead. They'd seen it work against the Matabele. 4 Maxims crushing a nation. They'd been warned at Port Arthur. 400 Japanese killed in a trench by 2 guns in enfilade. They chose to believe it wouldn't work against Europeans. Against civilized men. Against troops with proper training and discipline. They were catastrophically wrong. The Battle of the Somme continued for 141 more days after July 1st. 250,000 British casualties. 8 miles gained maximum. In late October, the Canadian Corps captured Regina Trench. Machine gunner Raymond Brudenell coordinates elaborate fire plans. Overhead fire supporting the assault. Barrage fire stopping German counterattacks. It works. Not perfectly. Nothing works perfectly in the mud and horror of the Somme. But it works. The machine gun used properly. Integrated with other arms. Supporting maneuver rather than just defending static positions. But this sophistication is lost in the myth. Buried under the memory of July 1, November, 96. Teen. Somewhere in England, in a house far from the Somme, Hiram Maxim dies. He is 76 years old. Has been ill for some time. The newspapers report his death. They mention his most famous invention. Some note the irony. The American inventor whose weapon is now killing thousands in the European war. But Maxim himself leaves no final statement. No comment on what his invention has become. No reflection on the slaughter. Perhaps he had nothing to say. Perhaps words failed him. Or perhaps in his practical engineering mind he saw no paradox. Had been asked to invent something that would enable Europeans to cut each other's throats with greater facility. Had delivered exactly what was requested. The problem wasn't the machine gun. The problem was that Europeans for 30 years had used it only to cut other people's throats. Then in August 1914, they turned it on each other and discovered what the Matabele had known in 1893, what the Mahdists had known at Omdurman, what the Japanese had known at Port Arthur. Guns that spat bullets as the heavens sometimes spit hail. No one could stand against them. Not Africans with spears. Not Japanese with rifles. Not British soldiers with orders to walk across no man's land. The machine gun didn't discriminate. It didn't care about race or nationality or civilization. Pointed at humans. Pull the trigger. Humans die. 600 rounds per minute. Hiram Maxim's legacy. The weapon that changed warfare forever. And the generals who celebrated it. Until they didn't.